What if Nirvana were Devo devotees? That's what we'll be discussing on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and each week I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I take a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Heart-Shaped Box by Nirvana, and I tried to remake that into a Devo-style new wave song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
Looking heaven of your highness, I left back. Throw down your umbilical noose so I can climb right back. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint. Forever and death to your prices survive. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint. Forever and death to your prices survive. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint. Forever and death to your prices advice. Your advice.
Nirvana looms so large over rock music of the 90s and beyond that I've ended up discussing them quite a lot in this series of videos already because they just crop up in so many different discussions. Obviously for many people they're the archetype of the grunge sound, whilst I think I've discussed in a previous video you can argue there's no one definitive grunge sound. I guess what most people would think of as the main building blocks of grunge would be a blend of hardcore punk with elements of 70s rock, and Nirvana certainly have that. The Black Sabbath comparison is obvious. There's a lot of those kind of down-tuned, heavy, kind of stoner rocky riffs going on in a lot of their music. And in terms of punk, absolutely you can hear Black Flag in there, particularly the My War era when Black Flag themselves were sort of looking back to some of that heavy stuff from the 70s. You can certainly hear the influence of Flipper that Kurt Cobain acknowledged, the San Francisco art punk band who specialised in these darkly funny, super negative, punishing, dirgy drones. There's certainly some of that in there too. And various other bits and bobs of punk and hardcore. So I think that's kind of a given about their sound. What for me sets Nirvana aside from their contemporaries really is the other influences outside those kind of standard grunge influences. Most of the other leading grunge bands have a certain amount of that blend of punk and hard rock, but then they all have their own different things going on. Pearl Jam have a bit of that kind of earnest classic rockness going on. Soundgarden maybe a bit of dark stoner, slightly psychedelic elements creeping in there. Mudhoney had this wild, scrappy kind of garage thing happening, whereas Nirvana had some quite different and quite quirky influences of their own. I think if you're listening to the covers on the Hormoning EP, which also turned up on the Incesticide compilation, you can hear a bit of where they were diverging from those other bands. So there's definitely some new wave and indie pop influences going on in there, which give them a whole other sound to some of their grunge contemporaries. Partly it was probably to do with feeling a bit of connection and kinship to the K Records scene up in Olympia. I know Kurt Cobain had a K Records tattoo, and although K as a label is definitely punk in its approach and its principles, probably music-wise it's more associated with a kind of like twee indie pop. Beat Happening, obviously Calvin Johnson's own band, and some of the other stuff they put out. I think maybe that's some of what's coming through in Nirvana's music. Obviously on those Peel Session tracks that appear on Incesticide, they're covering a couple of Vaseline songs. Again, that's that twee indie pop sound coming through. But the other notable thing that they cover on there, obviously, is Turnaround by Devo, which was the B-side of the Whip It single. And I can't think of any other grunge bands who were looking toward that kind of jerky new wave sound at all in their music. So again, it's just another poppier influence that marks Nirvana out as being just a little bit different from their grunge contemporaries. I think there's a quote from Kurt Cobain, if I'm remembering it approximately correctly, where he likens the band's sound to a mixture of sort of the riffs and heaviness of Black Flag and Black Sabbath with the pop melodies of the Bay City Rollers and the Beatles. And that sounds about right to me. I think certainly Beatles-wise, you can hear some of that influence in there. There's a John Lennon-ish quality to quite a few of the melodies that you hear in there. And maybe the Bay City Rollers you can't hear quite so obviously. But corny though they were certainly like a massive influence on the Ramones. I know Blitzkrieg Bop was effectively a rewrite of a Bay City Rollers song. So, you know, they're a crucial early punk influence, and if that's good enough for the Ramones, I guess it's good enough for Nirvana too. So yeah, although many people would think of Nirvana as typifying the grunge sound, for me, what actually made them special and what put them on a bit of a different level to the other bands that came out of that scene was the stuff that was atypical of grunge. This slightly more eclectic set of influences, and particularly the poppier influences from the Beatles through the Bay City Rollers, through the twee pop likes of the Pastels and the Vaselines, and new wave like Devo. It's all in there and it all blends in with that kind of punishing heaviness to make them something just a bit different to anything that anyone else was doing at the time. And it's funny, I've been using the term new wave to describe Devo because I guess that's what most people think of their sound as being, but when you actually look at Devo and realise how far back they go, they're in the peculiar position of being a band who were both proto-punk and new wave, kind of the thing that was meant to come after punk, and they were doing stuff that sounded like new wave before anything that anyone really categorised as punk existed. I'll probably do another video at some point that focuses on Devo, using a Devo song for something else, so I won't go into too much detail, but just as a quick overview, they were formed in Akron, Ohio back in 1973, and sort of had several years at the start of their career of being pretty much a sort of avant-garde art project. Proto-punky music with experimental electronic elements, mixed with bits of performance art. Early on, they'd already started to develop this philosophy of de-evolution that a lot of their songs are based on. They'd started to develop these kind of stage characters like Boogie Boy, these bizarre costumes that became an integral part of their stage show as well. When punk hit, I guess what they'd been doing suddenly made a little bit more sense. They weren't just sort of lone outsiders creating art in a void. They suddenly felt like they were a bit more part of something, even though they didn't really sound like any of the other punk bands. So they were there on the ground floor of punk. And when that first wave of punk faded away, they were still just there doing their own thing. By that point, they'd had enough success that they became a major influence on the sort of next wave of bands who would become what people thought of as new wave. So this whole generation of bands who were combining elements of the kind of energy and attack of punk with synthesizers and electronic drums and these different musical textures were all drawing pretty heavily on what Devo had been doing for the best part of a decade by then. In the context of this new wave of bands, their sound suddenly made a lot more commercial sense, so then you start to see them actually having some kind of hits, genuine hits with the likes of Whip It. And obviously with the rise of MTV too, they had a really MTV ready image. A lot of those early MTV hit videos were kind of pretty much oddball arty projects anyway, so Devo fit right in with that. I don't think they were ever really the kind of band that was going to be a mainstream proposition for too long, always just a bit too weird to have that kind of long-term mainstream exposure. So by the end of the 80s, they were definitely fading from their commercial high points, and they did go into quite a lengthy hiatus during the 90s. But yeah, as well as being a crucial influence on Nirvana as discussed, there've been various waves of synthy punk bands like the Epoxies, particularly, who are notable Devo disciples. They've definitely been a big influence on every successive generation of electropop. Probably a whole generation of electronica acts will have drawn from Devo. More recently, there's been a whole subgenre of punk called egg punk, which is bedroom punks making super lo-fi Devo-like electro-punk stuff, and that's been pretty exciting to see emerging as well. So their influence continues to loom large over popular music, and although there are always rumours that they might be about to wind it up, they still seem to be keeping pretty active, so hopefully they'll keep going. I feel like the world needs Devo, so yeah, great stuff. But yeah, to take it back to my alternative universe scenario for this week's song, I basically just proposed that there's an alternative universe. It's early 1993, so Nirvana have, obviously had massive success with Nevermind. They've been touring that. The label now wants them to come up with another similar record to just keep the momentum going. But as I'm sure was probably the case in our world as well, they're pretty burnt out with that. They're not too happy with the rock star lifestyle, pretty burnt out with the whole grunge thing, not really excited about continuing on the major label treadmill. So Kurt Cobain's thinking, what can he do to just break out of this cycle? And he starts going back through his records, thinking about some of his earlier influences, and winds up thinking about Devo. And he's obviously thinking a couple of years earlier they've done a Devo cover and they've taken Devo's sound and turned it into a grunge thing. So how about for this next record they do the opposite and take their own songs but then rework those so that they sound like the Devo template. Discusses it with the other band members, they're all on board with it, so they deliver this Devo sound-alike record to Geffen, who reluctantly release it. It's a commercial flop, fans just don't know what to make of it. Geffen drops them and it looks like their time in the spotlight's over, and that's exactly what Nirvana wanted. They weren't comfortable there, they're really happy to be out of the spotlight. Although a lot of their sort of more recently acquired fans have fallen off with this new direction, there's a small hardcore of fans who are really into it and just stick with them. So now that the pressure's off to keep on with the commercial success, they're happy to just keep cranking out these records that develop this Devo-like sound, preaching the philosophy of de-evolution to new generations of fans, and continue to have a long, happy career doing just that, and end up being a major influence on the egg punk scene for generations to come. So in order to achieve this Devo-sounding Nirvana, as usual, the first thing I do is just take Kurt's lead vocal, drop that into GarageBand, match up the tempo to the grid, and then I wanted to go for that kind of high energy, sort of whip it, freedom of choice era sound, so cranked up the tempo quite a lot, so it's much faster than the original. Pop some drums on next. I've got a mixture of acoustic type drum sounds and drum machine sounds, just to mimic that point where Devo were kind of on the cusp between being more of a straight ahead rock band and then going more electronic, so that early 80s sound again. So I've got an acoustic kit, just playing a fairly straightforward 4 on the floor kind of driving beat with bits of electronic drums. There's some electronic toms in there, some fake hand claps as well, just to give it that sort of clipped early 80s electro new wave kind of sound. And I've got some regular electric bass and electric guitar on there. Electric guitar with just a sound that's just tipping a little bit over into breakup, but not full on distortion. I didn't want it to be raging punk distortion. I just wanted that slightly overdriven sound that you hear on some of those Devo records. And the bass is really simple, just hammering away on eighth notes for the most part. And I doubled that an octave up with a synth bass as well, which I thought gave it a nice kind of new wavy feel again, and just keeps that sort of propulsive, synthesized kind of sound. There are a couple more synths in there too. There's a fairly gnarly sound that I bring in to play a couple of riffs and also to take the place of the guitar solo. And there's another different sound, which is kind of like a bell chiming sound that pops up in a couple of places too, so just a few different synthesized textures in there. In that section that would be the guitar solo, just for another Devo-ish kind of touch, I messed around with the rhythm, so I've taken a beat out of every other bar, so you get alternating bars of 3/4 time, just to kind of throw everything a little bit off kill, to give it a bit of that jerky, unexpected kind of feel that you get with some of those old Devo songs. And then for the video, just found some reasonable footage from, I think, a 1994 Nirvana gig to use as a basis, and then interspersed that with a few different bits and bobs. So found some cool footage of some early 80s new wave kids dancing in some American club, just to give a bit of a feel of the kind of audiences who might be listening to this kind of music. And there's also a few clips from an old Devo film where they're showing off a particular design of Energy Dome, the signature Devo hat. So I worked that in there too. I've got a few pairs of clapping hands to match up with the electronic hand claps on the track. And then I also very ineptly photoshopped, or photoscaped I should say. I used the free Photoscape app instead of expensive Photoshop. Photoscaped energy domes onto a couple of Nirvana album covers and a few pictures of Nirvana just to show what it might look like if they were getting into the spirit of de-evolution. So I hope you enjoyed it. I mean, I love Nirvana, I love Devo, so I enjoyed putting the two together. That was a great bit of fun. Hopefully I haven't offended any Nirvana fans or Devo fans. I personally think Kurt Cobain would probably have found it pretty funny to hear one of his songs done in the style of Devo. I could be wrong, I don't know. But let me know what you think in the comments. If you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. I always really appreciate that. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks, any genres you'd like me to try my hand at, any artists you'd like me to look at, or any songs you'd like me to take on, do let me know as well. I've got a little list that I'm building and I will do my best to get around to as many of them as possible in future. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching and I will see you next time.